Cleaning blood off a custom Brioni suit was a tedious chore Lorenzo Costa accepted as the cost of ruling New York's underworld. However, navigating daily violence was effortless compared to the paralyzing terror gripping his chest at the mere thought of another man laying eyes on the woman he cherished. The base inside the box, Manhattan's most notoriously exclusive and debauched nightclub, vibrated straight through the soles of Valerie Hayes' strappy Louboutin heels. The air was thick with the scent of expensive Tom Ford cologne, spilled Dom Perignon, and the heavy electric sweat of the city's elite. Valerie stood near the edge of the sunken dance floor, gripping a crystal tumbler of sparkling water like it was a shield. She felt entirely out of place, and yet, for the first time in a long time, dangerously beautiful. Valerie was a fat woman in a room full of sharp angles and surgically enhanced perfection. She possessed a heavy, soft stomach, wide hips, and thick thighs that touched when she walked. For years, she had buried her body beneath shapeless navy blazers and modest slacks, blending into the sterile, fluorescent-lit background of Deloitte, where she worked as a senior forensic auditor. But tonight was her 28th birthday. Her best friend, Bianca, had dragged her out of her Upper West Side apartment, thrust a garment bag into her hands, and demanded she take up space. The dress Bianca had bought her was a custom-draped emerald green silk slip. It did not hide her fat. It celebrated it. The fabric clung to the deep curve of her waist, draped sensually over the prominent swell of her stomach, and dipped dangerously low at her cleavage. Her bare shoulders and thick, soft arms were on full display. When she had looked in the mirror, she hadn't seen a woman who needed to shrink. She had seen a Renaissance painting. But out here, in the dim, pulsing neon lights of the club, that confidence was beginning to fray. Men walked past, their eyes skimming over her. Some looked with blatant, crude curiosity, others with a dismissive sneer. Valerie took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She told herself she didn't care. She was here for herself. What she didn't know was that the most dangerous man in the room hadn't taken his eyes off her since she walked through the velvet ropes downstairs. Lorenzo Costa sat in the elevated VIP section, cloaked in the shadows of a velvet booth. At 34, Lorenzo was the undisputed head of the Costa Syndicate, a massive criminal enterprise hidden behind the gleaming glass facades of legitimate shipping and real estate companies. He was a man carved from marble and violence, with sharp cheekbones, pitch-black hair, and eyes the color of a winter ocean. He slowly twisted a heavy crystal glass of Macallan 25 in his large, scarred hand. His knuckles were white. Lorenzo had met Valerie 3 months ago, when her auditing firm was contracted to review the books for Costa Logistics. She was supposed to be a nobody, just another pencil pusher. But Valerie was brilliant. She had found a multi-million-dollar discrepancy, money being siphoned off by one of Lorenzo's own capos. Instead of going to the authorities, the naive, highly ethical auditor had marched directly into Lorenzo's office at the top of the Chrysler Building, terrified but determined, to present him with her findings, assuming he was merely a CEO being robbed by an employee. Lorenzo had handled the traitorous capo with a bullet in a Brooklyn warehouse, but he hadn't known how to handle Valerie. From the moment she had stood in front of his desk, her soft, flushed face trembling with nervous energy, her heavy curves hidden under a dreadful beige pantsuit, Lorenzo had been consumed. In a life defined by sharp edges, cold steel, and endless paranoia, Valerie's sheer softness was a sanctuary. He became obsessed with her. He had his men tail her. He bought the coffee shop across from her apartment, just so he could ensure she got her morning latte exactly how she liked it. He knew her routines, her laughter, her quiet insecurities, and now she was here, in his club, wearing a dress that looked like spun jewels, exposing the lush, fat body he had spent countless sleepless nights fantasizing about. "Boss?" a low voice rumbled beside him. It was Matteo, his right-hand man. "You're crushing the glass." Lorenzo looked down. The thick crystal was groaning under his grip. He forced his fingers to relax, setting the glass on the brass table. His icy blue eyes snapped back to the dance floor. A sleek, sharply dressed man had just approached the bar near Valerie. Lorenzo's jaw clenched so hard, his teeth ached. "Who is that?" Lorenzo asked, his voice a lethal, vibrating baritone. Matteo leaned over the railing, squinting through the strobe lights. "That's Roman Orlov. Bratva. He runs the extortion rackets out of Brighton Beach. What the hell is he doing in our territory?" Lorenzo's blood ran cold, and then a second later it boiled. Roman wasn't just looking for a drink. The Russian underboss was moving deliberately, cutting through the crowd, his predatory gaze locked dead onto the emerald silk draped over Valerie's curves. Roman knew who she was. "He knows she ran the audit on the docks," Lorenzo stated, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. The missing money that Valerie had uncovered hadn't just been stolen by Lorenzo's capo. It had been secretly funneled to the Orlov syndicate to fund a coup. Valerie was the only civilian who had seen the raw data before Lorenzo had scrubbed it. "Matteo," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. He stood up, buttoning his charcoal suit jacket. "Lock the front doors. No one leaves." Down on the floor, Valerie politely shifted to her left as a tall, blond man in a silver-grey suit stepped into her personal space. She kept her eyes on the bartender, hoping Bianca would return from the restroom soon. A beautiful dress. A thick, accented voice murmured directly into her ear, "Though it is struggling to contain so much." "Woman." Valerie stiffened. She turned her head, finding the man standing inches away. He smelled heavily of stale smoke and vodka. His eyes were cold, scanning her heavy chest and the broad curve of her hips with an unsettling mixture of mockery and dark intent. "Excuse me," Valerie said, her voice firm, though her hands were shaking. "I'm waiting for a friend." "I am sure you are, Valerie Hayes," Roman smiled, revealing a gold tooth near the back of his mouth. Valerie's breath hitched. "How do you know my name?" "I know many things," Roman purred, taking a step closer, backing her up against the mahogany edge of the bar. The music was too loud. No one around them noticed the interaction. "I know you are very good with numbers. Very thorough. I know you work late on the 14th floor of the Deloitte building. And I know that a woman of your generous size must be very lonely to be out in a place like this. A fat little lamb wandering into a wolf's den." Valerie felt a cold sweat break out along her neck. This wasn't a drunk patron making a crude pass. This was a threat. Before she could scream, Roman reached out, his hand wrapping aggressively around her bare, thick upper arm. His fingers dug into her soft flesh. "You have a copy of the original dock ledgers. You are going to give them to me, or I will carve the fat from your bones while you scream." "Let go of me," Valerie gasped, trying to wrench her arm away. Roman's grip only tightened, bruising her skin. Suddenly, the air pressure in the room seemed to shift. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, falling sunk in a localized bubble of terror. A large, scarred hand shot out of the strobe-lit darkness. It seized the back of Roman's neck with the crushing force of a steel vice. Roman gasped, releasing Valerie's arm as he was violently yanked backward. He stumbled, catching his footing just in time to come face to face with Lorenzo Costa. Valerie pressed her back against the bar, her eyes wide with shock. She recognized him instantly, the terrifyingly handsome, intense CEO of Costa Logistics, the man whose office she had nervously babbled in 3 months ago. What was he doing here? Lorenzo didn't look like a CEO right now. He looked like the devil himself. Without a word, Lorenzo delivered a brutal, lightning-fast punch to Roman's gut. The Russian doubled over, coughing violently. Before Roman could recover, Lorenzo grabbed him by the lapels of his silver suit and slammed him face first into the mahogany bar, mere inches from where Valerie was trembling. The sound of cartilage snapping was audible even over the heavy bass of the club's speakers. "Lorenzo!" Valerie choked out, terrified. Lorenzo ignored the bleeding Russian groaning on the bar top. His blazing blue eyes snapped to Valerie. He saw the red, angry marks blossoming on her thick arm where Roman had grabbed her. He saw the way the other club patrons were now staring at her, their eyes raking over her exposed, trembling curves, whispering, pointing. A possessive, animalistic rage overtook him. Lorenzo shrugged off his custom Brioni suit jacket. He stepped into Valerie's personal space, entirely blocking her from the view of the club. His broad chest became her entire world. He swung the heavy charcoal grey jacket over her bare shoulders, pulling the lapels tightly together across her chest, effectively hiding the deep emerald silk, her cleavage, and the soft curve of her stomach from the hungry eyes of the crowd. "Nobody looks at what is mine," the jealous Mafia boss growled, covering her up at the club. His voice was a raw, dangerous rasp that sent a violent shiver straight down Valerie's spine. "Yours?" Valerie breathed, clutching the edges of his jacket, which smelled of gunpowder and expensive scotch. "Mr. Costa, I don't understand. He knew my name. I know," Lorenzo said softly, the lethal edge in his voice vanishing the second he spoke to her. He raised a hand, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray curl away from her terrified face. "I'm going to take care of it. You are safe now, Mia Bella. My beautiful. You belong to me." Before she could process the sheer insanity of his words, Matteo and 3 other massive men in dark suits materialized around them, completely encircling them. Matteo hauled the semi-conscious Roman off the bar by his collar. "Take him to the basement," Lorenzo ordered, without looking away from Valerie. "Find out who sent him inside, then gut him." Valerie's stomach bottomed out. "Gut him? Come with me," Lorenzo commanded gently but firmly, placing a heavy, protective hand on the small of her back. He didn't give her a chance to argue. Lorenzo guided her through the VIP exit, bypassing the stunned crowd, leading her down a private, dimly lit corridor that opened into a private underground garage. A black, armored Mercedes Maybach was idling in the center, its engine purring like a caged beast. "Wait, wait!" Valerie dug her heels into the concrete, forcing Lorenzo to stop. The oversized Brioni jacket slipped off one of her shoulders, and she scrambled to pull it back up. "I can't go anywhere with you. Bianca is inside. My purse is inside. And you just told your men to murder someone." Lorenzo turned to face her. The fluorescent lights of the garage cast harsh shadows over his sharp features. He stepped close, crowding her against the side of the armored car. He looked down at her, his eyes tracing the beautiful, heavy curves of her body hidden beneath his coat, his chest heaving with lingering adrenaline. "Your friend Bianca is already being escorted home safely by my men," Lorenzo said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your purse is in the front seat of this car, and the man upstairs is a lieutenant in the Russian Mafia who is going to torture you for information." Valerie stared at him, her mouth opening and closing. "Russian Mafia? You're a shipping CEO." Lorenzo let out a dark, humorless chuckle. He reached out, his large hands gripping her soft, thick waist through the fabric of the coat. A jolt of electricity shot through Valerie at the touch. It was claiming, undeniable, and completely overwhelming. "Valerie," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the quiet garage. "I am the head of the Costa family, and you, my beautiful, brilliant girl, are the only reason Roman Orlov knows about the missing money. Because of that audit, they want you dead." Valerie felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees buckled, but Lorenzo's iron grip on her waist held her firmly upright. "But don't worry," Lorenzo murmured, leaning in until his lips brushed the shell of her ear. "They won't touch a single hair on your head. They won't even be allowed to look at you. Because we are leaving New York right now, and you are going to be under my protection. Permanently." He opened the heavy bulletproof door of the Maybach. "Get in, Valerie. The men who sent Roman are already tearing your Upper West Side apartment apart. Your old life is over." The tires of the armored Maybach crunched over the crushed white gravel of a sprawling, heavily fortified estate situated on a jagged cliffside in Montauk. The journey from Manhattan had been a blur of silent terror and exhausting adrenaline. Valerie had spent the entire 2-hour drive huddled against the plush leather door, tightly clutching Lorenzo's Brioni jacket around her shoulders, while the Mafia boss sat opposite her, radiating a quiet, lethal tension while barking coded orders in rapid-fire Italian into a burner phone. When the heavy iron gates of the compound finally locked shut behind them, sealing them away from the rest of the world, Lorenzo ended his call. He turned his piercing winter ocean eyes toward her, the harsh interior lights of the car casting deep shadows across his sharp jawline. He did not ask her to step out. Instead, he smoothly slid across the spacious cabin, scooped her heavy, soft body into his arms as effortlessly as if she weighed nothing, and carried her out into the freezing salt air of the Atlantic. Valerie was too stunned to protest. She buried her face into the crook of his neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of expensive sandalwood, gun oil, and pure, concentrated power. When Valerie awoke the next morning, the sunlight was streaming through floor-to-ceiling blast-proof windows, illuminating a bedroom that looked more like a master suite at the Four Seasons than a Mafia hideout. She was tangled in 1,000-thread-count fret linens, her emerald silk dress carefully folded on a velvet armchair nearby. In its place, she wore an oversized, impossibly soft cashmere sweater that smelled faintly of Lorenzo. Panic, temporarily subdued by exhaustion, clawed its way back up her throat. She pushed herself up, her thick thighs tangling in the heavy duvet. She was a hostage, a protected asset, a fat, boring forensic auditor who had accidentally stumbled into a blood feud between the Italian syndicate and the Russian Bratva. The heavy mahogany door clicked open. Lorenzo walked in, carrying a silver tray. He had changed into a pair of dark tailored slacks and a crisp, white Tom Ford dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faded ink. He looked devastatingly calm, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos he had unleashed the night before. "Good morning," Lorenzo rumbled, his deep baritone sending a traitorous shiver down Valerie's spine. He set the tray on the edge of the sprawling king-sized bed. It held a steaming cup of coffee, a fresh croissant, and a small jar of La Mer moisturizer. I had my men retrieve some essentials from your apartment before it was compromised. I took the liberty of guessing your skin care. Valerie stared at him, pulling the thick cashmere tightly around her soft stomach. My apartment was actually compromised. You weren't just saying that to scare me into the car. Lorenzo's expression darkened, the warmth draining from his face. I never lie to you, Valerie. By 3 a.m., Roman's men had kicked your door in. They tore your mattress apart and ripped the hard drives from your computer. If you had gone home, you would be dead. A cold sweat broke out along her hairline. Because of the missing money, she whispered, her voice trembling. Because I found the routing numbers, hiding the offshore accounts. Yes, Lorenzo said, stepping closer. He sat on the edge of the bed, his imposing frame dominating the space. But there is something else you need to know. Something that might make you hate me. But I refuse to keep secrets from the woman who is going to be my wife. Valerie choked on her own breath. You're what? Lorenzo ignored the outburst, his blue eyes locking onto hers with terrifying intensity. The audit. 3 months ago. Deloitte didn't randomly assign you to the Costa Logistics account, Valerie. I demanded you. The room seemed to spin. What? Why, Bahia? I didn't even know you existed 3 months ago. But I knew you, Lorenzo confessed, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. He reached out, his large, scarred fingers gently tracing the soft curve of her cheek. 6 months ago, I was in the lobby of your building, meeting with a corrupt city official. I saw you drop a stack of files near the elevator. I watched 3 men in suits step right over you, completely ignoring you as you scrambled to pick them up. I helped you gather them. You looked up at me, flushed, entirely unaware of your own beauty, and thanked me. Valerie's mind flashed back to a blurry Tuesday morning. A tall stranger in a dark suit, handing her a fallen ledger. She had been so embarrassed by her own clumsiness, she hadn't even looked at his face properly. From that second, I was completely consumed, Lorenzo continued, his thumb now brushing over her trembling lower lip. I had my men find out who you were. I learned how brilliant you are, how kind, how the world constantly overlooked you because you didn't fit into their narrow, pathetic definition of perfection. But to me, you were a goddess, a lush, beautiful queen that I needed to possess. So I orchestrated the audit. I created the discrepancy. I needed an excuse to bring you into my world without terrifying you. You created the missing money, Valerie gasped, horrified. You framed your own capo. He was stealing from me already, Lorenzo said dismissively, as if ordering a man's execution was merely an administrative task. I simply redirected the stolen funds to make it blatantly obvious to an auditor of your caliber. I knew you would find it. I knew you would come to my office, but I did not anticipate that my traitorous capo had already promised that exact money to the Orlov Bratva to fund a war against me. By solving my trap, you made yourself a target to the Russians. Valerie slapped his hand away, furious tears springing to her eyes. You manipulated my life. You treated me like a pawn on a chessboard just because you had some sick obsession with my body. Not just your body, Valerie, Lorenzo growled, leaning in so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. His gaze dropped to her heavy, soft chest, heaving under the cashmere, then back up to her blazing eyes. Your mind, your spirit. I worshipped every inch of you from afar, but I am a selfish, ruthless man. I wanted you in my bed, wearing my ring. And now that you are here, I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone take you from me." Before Valerie could unleash the furious retort building in her throat, the serene silence of the Montauk morning was shattered by the deafening shriek of the compound's perimeter alarms. Red emergency lights instantly strobed through the bedroom, painting Lorenzo's face in sinister, bloody flashes. The heavy mahogany door burst open, and Matteo sprinted into the room, a matte black automatic rifle clutched tightly in his hands. "Boss!" Matteo shouted over the blaring siren. "It's Alexei Orlov, Roman's older brother. He's brought 30 heavily armed men. They blew the main gate with C4. They are swarming the courtyard." Lorenzo didn't flinch. The lovesick, obsessive man vanished, replaced instantly by the cold-blooded apex predator of the New York underworld. He stood up, calmly unbuttoning the cuffs of his Tom Ford shirt. He reached under the heavy mattress and pulled out 2 loaded Glock 19, chambering rounds in both with terrifying precision. "Take her to the vault," Lorenzo ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Lock from the inside. Do not open the door unless you hear my voice, or I am dead." "Lorenzo, no!" Valerie screamed, scrambling off the bed. Her bare feet hit the cold hardwood floor. She grabbed his arm, her thick fingers sinking into his hard muscle. "There are 30 of them. You can't just walk out there." Lorenzo turned, cupping the back of her head with one large, warm hand. He pulled her flush against his chest, kissing her with a bruising, desperate violence that tasted of coffee and impending death. "Hide, my beautiful girl. When this is over, you can yell at me all you want. I promise." He shoved her gently toward Matteo and sprinted out the door, disappearing down the marble hallway just as the first deafening crack of automatic gunfire echoed through the mansion. Matteo grabbed Valerie's arm, dragging her down a hidden servants' corridor. The walls vibrated as explosions rocked the lower floors, screams, shattering glass, and the relentless, rhythmic pounding of bullets filled the air. Valerie was crying, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was a forensic auditor. She worked with spreadsheets and calculators, not bombs and blood. Matteo shoved a heavy bookcase aside, revealing a reinforced steel door. He punched in a 12-digit code, hauling Valerie inside a windowless panic room lined with security monitors and weapons. The heavy door hissed shut, locking them in total silence, completely cutting off the sounds of the war raging outside. Valerie stared at the bank of glowing monitors, her breath catching in her throat. The high-definition cameras showed a bloodbath in the grand foyer. Men in black tactical gear were exchanging heavy fire with Lorenzo's guards. And in the center of it all, moving with the lethal grace of a shadow, was Lorenzo. He fired with deadly accuracy, dropping Russian hitmen with every pull of the trigger, but there were too many. On the screen, Valerie watched in horror as a massive, bearded man, Alexei Orlov, flanked Lorenzo from behind a marble pillar, raising a tactical shotgun directly at Lorenzo's exposed back. "Matteo, he's behind him!" Valerie shrieked, pointing at the monitor. Matteo cursed violently in Italian, grabbing a radio. "Boss, 6 o'clock, behind the pillar, behind." The radio in Lorenzo's earpiece must have crackled, because he dove to the side just as Alexei fired. The shotgun blast shredded the marble wall where Lorenzo's head had been a fraction of a second earlier. Lorenzo rolled, firing 2 shots into Alexei's shoulder, but the massive Russian didn't go down. He charged, tackling Lorenzo into the grand staircase. Valerie felt her soul rip in half. She couldn't watch him die. She couldn't just stand here. Her brilliant mind, The mind Lorenzo claimed to worship raced furiously. "Matteo, the PA system," Valerie demanded, her voice suddenly shedding all its terror, replaced by cold, hard logic. "Turn on the house intercom, now!" Matteo stared at her, confused, but hit a switch on the console. Valerie grabbed the microphone. She closed her eyes, visualizing the intricate, encrypted spreadsheets she had spent weeks analyzing in her cubicle at Deloitte. She remembered every single digit. "Alexei Orlov!" Valerie's voice boomed through the speakers across the entire estate, echoing over the gunfire. In the foyer, the fighting paused for a fraction of a second as the combatants looked up at the ceiling. "This is Valerie Hayes. I am the auditor. I have the routing numbers for the offshore accounts your brother died trying to protect." On the monitor, Alexei froze, his hands gripping Lorenzo's throat. He looked around wildly. "Cayman Islands, account 44-892-001, Valerie recited clearly, her voice echoing like a judge handing down a sentence. "Zurich, account 77-B-993-X. If you kill Lorenzo Costa, my firm's dead man switch will automatically forward the full ledger, including your personal embezzlement from the Bratva High Council, to the FBI and your pachan in Moscow. Your own bosses will execute you." It was a complete, desperate bluff. There was no dead man switch, but the numbers were real, and Alexei's face drained of color as he realized the fat civilian auditor held the keys to his utter destruction. That momentary hesitation was all the apex predator needed. Lorenzo shoved a concealed combat knife upward, burying it deep under Alexei's jaw. The Russian warlord choked, his eyes rolling back as he collapsed heavily onto the marble stairs. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining Bratva mercenaries broke rank, scattering toward the blown-out doors, only to be ruthlessly gunned down by Matteo's reinforcements arriving from the perimeter. Silence descended upon the bloody estate. Valerie dropped the microphone, her knees finally giving out. She collapsed onto the floor of the panic room, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her hollow and trembling. 10 minutes later, the heavy steel door hissed open. Lorenzo stood in the doorway. His crisp white shirt was splattered with crimson. His knuckles were raw and split, but his ocean blue eyes were fixed solely on her, blazing with a mixture of absolute awe and ferocious devotion. He dropped to his knees in front of her, ignoring the pain in his battered body. He pulled her into his lap, wrapping his massive, blood-stained arms around her soft, trembling frame. Valerie buried her face in his chest, clinging to his ruined shirt, her thick thighs wrapping instinctively around his hips as he held her tight. "You saved my life," Lorenzo rasped, pressing a fierce, lingering kiss into her tangled hair. "You brilliant, beautiful, terrifying woman. You saved me." "You lied to me," Valerie sobbed, hitting his chest weakly. "You dragged me into this nightmare." "I dragged you into my life," Lorenzo corrected fiercely, pulling back just enough to force her to look at him. His thumbs wiped the tears from her flushed, full cheeks. "And I will spend the rest of my days making sure you never shed another tear in fear. You are the queen of this syndicate now, Valerie. You command my men. You command me." Valerie looked into the eyes of the monster who had manipulated her life, the murderer who had just slaughtered a dozen men, and realized the most terrifying truth of all. She did not want to leave. In the arms of the devil, her soft, heavy body was treated like sacred scripture. In his bloody kingdom, she was not invisible. She was absolute. "Nobody looks at what is mine," Lorenzo whispered, quoting his own vow from the club, his hands gripping her lush hips with possessive reverence. Valerie leaned in, pressing her lips against his in a deep, sealing kiss, finally accepting the beautiful darkness of her new reality. "Then make sure," she murmured against his mouth, "that you are the only one looking." If you found yourself holding your breath during Valerie and Lorenzo's thrilling, dangerous romance, don't keep this intense mafia drama a secret. Hit that like button right now to show your support and share this video with your friends who crave steamy, suspenseful stories with unforgettable twists. Want more heart-pounding underworld romances and powerful heroines? Make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next epic story.